This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. We're told that small business is the backbone of Canadian industry, but if that's true, we might be suffering from scoliosis or some other spinal problem. We are not very kind as Canadians to small business, and small business operators do employ just thousands and thousands and thousands of Canadians and pay enormous taxes. I would say the two biggest problems for small businesses are taxes and rent. And we might add politicians, but we'll get to that. Our guest is Richard Truscott, who's the Director of Provincial Affairs for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Richard, thank you for joining us. You still got your head above water. You haven't been buried.
We're working hard.
So in the recent municipal elections, you help me. I don't know that I heard one politician from any municipality in the Lower Mainland speak about small business.
Well, there was some. There were a few.
There?
Yeah, there
Okay.
was. And we certainly were sending requests for the politicians to respond to our surveys about small business issues.
Okay.
So we were looking for some commitments on controlling municipal operating budgets,
Yes.
on cutting red tape, on rebalancing the tax system to make it more fair for small business. And so we were out there beating the bushes, trying to get some promises, some commitments on small business issues. So there was a bit of that. I agree with you, there wasn't enough conversation, enough discussion about these very important issues facing entrepreneurs in our province.
Did you get any, what are some of the small sort of good notes that you heard?
Well, there's a lot of promises, and there's some recognition, I think, finally, that there are some serious issues at play, for instance, in terms of growing municipal government, in terms of the increasing tax burden, in terms of the additional red tape that a lot of small business owners face. So
Absolutely.
I think at least we're starting to hear and see some recognition that there are some problems, and of course that's the first step to actually solving those problems, is to actually agree that there are some things that we need to work on, and then to develop some strategies to do that.
I think, for example, of friends I know, I won't say in which district, but yes, I will. It's Commercial Drive.
Okay.
I have friends who own businesses. So, one guy wants to start serving ice cream through a window. People are coming in, but he also wants a window. Well, you wouldn't believe the 2 years of red tape with City Hall about, will you have an awning over the window? Yeah, okay, yeah. What about across the street, there's a long-standing Italian restaurant that would like an inner courtyard, which anybody who's ever been to an Italian restaurant knows that's part of the joy of going, right? No, you can't have an inner courtyard. Why not?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And those are great examples from BC. There was a crazy one in Quebec recently where the mayor of a town in Quebec was saying that they didn't like the color of the chairs in a restaurant, and they were demanding that the business owner change the color. They didn't like orange, they wanted them to be brown. And it was quite astounding that the municipal government seemed to think that was a priority issue. So this is not something that...
How is that even their business?
Well, and this is not something that's unique to BC, I guess is my point, that this is a similar theme that we see across the country. Municipal governments poking their noses into those kinds of things that really, do they really matter that much? I mean...
Or is it their affair?
Yeah, and so, it's a funny thing because politicians and even Canadians say that they love and they respect small business and they want to support small business, but unfortunately when it comes right down to it, they say that, but they don't actually walk the walk. And too often they'll drive right past Main Street out to those big box retailers or out to a big department store and bypass all those those great little small businesses that exist in our cities. And it's unfortunate because municipal governments have been following some policies that are actually driving those businesses out to the periphery and hollowing out the number of small businesses in the core in a place like Vancouver. And that's a real shame because that provides, a real life to the city. It provides choice to consumers, and there's a ton of really great small businesses.
There are,
but I worry about them.
And in Vancouver in particular, the ones that I notice the most are fruit and vegetable stores. Most of my friends think I'm just flat nuts because I happen to love Safeway. I've shopped at Safeway since I was a child. I still think Safeway is great, but when it comes to fruit and vegetables, I can buy fresher, better, richer fruit and vegetables, cheaper than at Safeway, which buys by the carload. Someday someone will have to explain that to me.
Yeah, well, and some small businesses do have a tough time competing on price. There's some, like you described, that actually do an awesome job at it.
They're great.
Yeah, but the ones that can't, they also need to think about how else they can compete in terms of offering niche products or knowing a lot about the products or services that they provide. So there is some additional value they can provide to Canadians.
Or this oddity that is largely foreign to British Columbia shops called service.
Yeah. That's right.
We're all waiting for what's going to open downtown. Nordstrom's, who's opening Nordstrom. And maybe we'll learn from them.
Yeah. But I think it's all about Canadians making a conscious choice to actually think small and shop small. And to, instead of going to a big box or a big chain all the time, think about going to the local business, supporting the local economy.
Absolutely.
And the reason why that's important, and we've mentioned a few reasons, but when we ask our members how involved are they in the local community and supporting local charitable causes, well, 99% of our members say they do that with time,
their baseball
with money.
teams.
Yeah, that's right, supporting local causes and charities. So if you're supporting local business, you're supporting the community.
Did you folks have a hand in the Yellow Pages' current initiative called shoptheneighborhood.ca?
No, we have something similar though. We have a Small Business Saturday. And we have,
What is it?
So during Small Business Week, we have a special day Saturday where we encourage Canadians to think small and to go shop small, and to also think about little acts of small business by pulling out their debit card rather than their credit card or using cash, because that's a small little thing that a lot of Canadians don't realize. But when they use their credit card, we all love the points and the perks, but that comes at a cost to the merchant. There's service charges, processing charges that are built into the transactions done with credit cards, and those costs really add up fast.
But your organization, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, was key in getting some of those service charges cut down by almost a percentage point. That was amazing. How did you do that?
Well, a lot of pressure, and that is a first. It's the first time we've seen a stop to the escalation in credit card fees. What's been happening in the last 5 or 10 years is the credit card companies and the banks have been introducing a lot of premium cards. And while, again, we like the points and the perks, we don't realize that they come with added percentage in terms of transactions. So instead of 1% or 1.5% of the cost of sale for a merchant, it's actually 2 or 2.5%.
For sure.
And again, those dollars really add up. If we're talking about large items or big purchases or many purchases, those items really add up. Those costs really add up.
Do you find any local merchants or anybody in your organization using the new Square app, which I use to sell my book?
Well, and
do people use it?
And people love the convenience.
I love it.
We don't want to put up barriers to people using credit cards. It's a convenient way to pay, and I know a lot of members don't want to put up any barriers in that sense, but they do want Canadians to think twice about using that credit card. The next phase of this, though, is those mobile payments. So in the future, we're going to be taking our smartphones and just waving it at the till, and that will do the transaction. And what kind of fees are associated when those transactions are happening in cyberspace? So
let me ask you. This is an odd a strategic question. What would happen if all of the shops in the Lower Mainland had a policy, no credit card use for under $20? And the reason I ask that is because I switched to mostly cash in almost everything some years ago because I was tired of credit card payments. So now I'm one of these guys, if I'm in a line and I see people pulling out a credit, people use their credit card for a latte.
Everything,
Come on. Get out of my way. Could I please have my coffee? I don't want to watch you doing all this. for a latte.
And unfortunately, once you start accepting credit cards, the rules say that you have to accept all credit cards. If you accept one type of credit card, you have to accept them all. So it's a slippery slope, and it's one that a lot of entrepreneurs are starting to spin their wheels on and getting very frustrated. But we are starting to see some progress, as you mentioned, which is great. A light at the end of the tunnel.
What about people connecting what appeared to be totally different stories? On the one hand, you have people like you and your organization saying, let's support small business, and trying to talk politicians into discussing these issues when they're trying to get elected. On the other hand, we're paying CEOs of healthcare units and hospitals $500,000, and then we're robbing from the donation till to top up their salaries, which I think is disgusting. Isn't there a connection between these two things?
Well, there's a big connection, because those business owners and other taxpayers work really hard for that money to support the government, and when they see it being wasted, or exorbitant compensation paid to government officials, that does really stick in their craw. That's something that really bothers them. They certainly would like more transparency and accountability, our members, just like a lot of other Canadians, for the money that's being spent, the billions.
How do you feel, how do the small business owners of this community feel when the Speaker of the House in Victoria is spending money frivolously on a bigger TV screen or better rubber boots?
Well, it drives them crazy.
Spends money on.
Yeah, it drives them crazy, because again, they work tooth and nail to earn a dollar, and they don't mind paying taxes in terms of supporting important public services, healthcare, education, social services,
fire,
infrastructure.
The roads.
But when they see government waste, when they see it being wasted, it just drives them crazy, because they do work so hard for that money, and to give it to the government to waste is a real shame.
Let's be honest, Richard. People who are involved with small business basically are married to their business minimum the first 3 years.
I think a lot of Canadians don't realize how hard it is to run a small business, and a lot of politicians don't understand either. Thankfully, there are some politicians that come from a small business background. In this latest election, for instance, in Chilliwack, I was just there today, and a big portion of the new council are actually small business owners, which is
Maybe
great.
there should be a new law in Canada. You cannot run for office unless you've run a lemonade stand.
Yeah, or at least for a month or a couple of months, right? Like a training course. Yeah, sure.
Richard Truscott is our guest. He's the Director of Provincial Affairs for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. We'll take just a moment, breather, your opportunity to send us an email at davidberner.com. Always happy to hear from you. And an opportunity for the wonderful people who support this program to say hello here on Shaw Community Television Cable 4. Back with you in just a moment. When we come back. This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home. Building recovery that works. Like that. Talking with Richard Truscott from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and it's a tough go for everybody running small. Now, of course, small business, not all small businesses are a corner store. Lots of small businesses have 40 people or 50, 60 people, and so on. Let's talk about the big bugaboo of small business, and that's taxes. We always struggle, especially in the cities, in the urban centers, councils struggle to find a balance between who's going to pay, their fair share of taxes, residents, homeowners, or businesses. The notes that I have say that British Columbia is way out of whack compared to all of Canada and especially to Alberta. Am I right?
Well, yeah, there's some of that for sure. And it certainly looks like if you look at British Columbia and the cities in BC, but also look across the country, it's really when cities start to grow that their appetite for more tax dollars grows. And it seems to them, to many politicians, that it's easier to put the tax bill on the commercial side, on business, rather than to go back to residents. There's less squealing, I guess, or less hissing, plucking the goose, and there's less hissing if you put that bill onto business owners. But the ratios are getting really out of whack. So for instance, here in Vancouver, it's 4.5 to 1. So businesses pay 4.5 times more than residents based on the same assessed value of property.
Yes.
So they're shouldering a much bigger burden of the property tax load than residents. And there's actually been some research in terms of looking at the taxes paid compared to the services received. There was a City of Vancouver study about 7 years ago that looked at this, and for every dollar of municipal services that a resident received, they only paid about 50 cents in taxes. For every dollar of services that a small business or any business receives,
Yes.
they were paying $2.50. So there's a real imbalance in the system, and it's unfortunate because it hits small business. I mean, maybe it's easy for a big business to pay those high taxes, but for a smaller business, it's very difficult.
BC's corporate tax burden, said Barbara Yaffe in a recent column, stands at 27.5%, compared with the Canadian average of 18% and the Alberta average of 17%. Now, Alberta, of course, has always had this, the golden touch because they have oil and so on. But even so, I mean, that's a lot of percentage points difference. What's our problem here in BC?
Yeah, and we have lots of resources here in BC too, right?
Yeah.
Forestry and mining,
exactly,
and liquefied natural gas maybe someday. So that argument only holds so much water. And there are some little things that the government here can do. They had promised to move that small business corporate income tax rate down to 0 a couple of years ago, and it never happened. And that's something that Manitoba did go and do. In terms of being competitive with Alberta, Alberta's rate is still 4 points. And so BC has some room there to move it down a little bit more and create a bit of a competitive advantage for our province.
And we're still paying for something that I think is a total scam, and it's a total joke, and that's the carbon tax.
Yeah.
It's been demonstrated over and over and over again that no matter what we do about our carbon problems, one burp from a volcano pollutes the whole planet more than all of Detroit.
Yeah. On taxes, however, we've come a long way. And actually, the formation of CFIB was 43 years ago, and it was in response to a government white paper at the time, back in the late 1960s, that said that the effective small business rate should be 50%, 50%. And the tax rate on big companies should be half that at 25%. So here we are today. I think there's still a lot of work we need to do in terms of driving those taxes down a little bit more. But we've certainly come a long way. And also the recognition, we're starting to get a little bit more respect and recognition from policymakers and from Canadians for small business. That's good, and even in terms of taxes. Back in 2011, when we celebrated our 40th anniversary, we actually had governments across this country, every provincial government, the federal government, and many municipalities declaring it the year of the entrepreneur. So, coming from a place where the government wanted to levy a 50% tax rate to, 2011, where they were trying to celebrate and recognize small business, I guess in a lot of ways we've come a long distance, but there's still work to be done. And the other bugaboo, besides taxes, is red tape. That's another one.
Yeah, absolutely. But let me stay on tax for a moment.
Sure.
We keep shifting things like what's the highest tax rate for people earning more than, say, $250,000. And, it's like 30%, 40%, whatever, and it keeps going back and forth. If you and the Canadian Federation of Independent Business were in charge of tax policy, what would you do?
Well, certainly on the business tax side, it would make sense to introduce some kind of progressivity into the property tax system, and there's some ideas as to how to do that. Maybe allow a special small business rate for municipalities to employ a special small business rate. I certainly would cap the overall differentials between what residents pay and what commercial property pays.
You and I are
2 to 1 or something, not this 4.5 to 1 stuff.
You and I are taxed as individuals according to our income.
Yeah.
But it looks to me like we're not really doing that with small business.
No, but you could say that, for instance, the first $100,000 or $50,000 of either property value or rental value would be exempt from paying property tax. So there are ways to do that. And the reason you do that is to help those businesses that are struggling, the businesses that operate on very thin profit margins. As you said, like a $9,000 a month rent or property payment, that's a pretty big hole to dig out of if you're a small business, to pay that every month.
It's gigantic.
Yeah.
Listen, we have a lot of people discussing an uncomfortable situation here in Vancouver with non-resident property owners, and that's in terms of homes. But let's take the same thing and apply it to businesses and rents. I know of several businesses that went out of business in high volume areas like 4th Avenue and West 10th Avenue because the rents were doubled and tripled.
Yeah.
The people left, and guess what? The owners of those properties were happy to see those properties sit empty for 2 years.
Yeah.
So shouldn't we have some law that says you can't do that?
Well, and that's a scenario where we're seeing an erosion of the tax base, and that's not good for other taxpayers because that means that tax load has to be shared among everybody else that's still there, including the business owners and the residents. So I think we really need to focus on creating a virtuous cycle of keeping the tax rates down, encouraging more businesses to set up and stay and become successful, and encouraging more people to go to small business. I think there's something to that, but to go the other way, to hike taxes and introduce more red tape, I think that's just causing what we're seeing, the flight of these small businesses to the periphery around the big cities.
I'm very encouraged by the language you just used. It's the first time I've ever heard anybody say a virtuous system.
Yeah, virtuous cycle.
Imagine thinking in terms of virtue and business in the same breath.
Hey, it's worth honoring small business that way.
It's a concept. Okay, let's talk about red tape.
Sure.
Could we ever have a mayor, we'll just stick with Vancouver, it could be anywhere, but could we ever have a mayor saying to city departments, look, stop niggling people to death, get off people's backs about petty crap, and let people do their business. If someone's breaking a law, go down, get down on them, shut them down, whatever, fine them. But, let's not go out of our way. You realize that if someone running a cafe in the Lower Mainland adds one chair to their outdoor patio, they're going to pay a premium on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a ton of rules that don't make any sense.
Yes.
And is this what we really want as a country or as a province or as a city?
Yes.
To have our business owners tied up in red tape. So rather than running their business and creating jobs and supporting the local community, they're busy filling out forms, they're ticking boxes, they're surfing websites. It's crazy. And for a bigger company, you have a person or a team of people that's responsible for all that paperwork.
Yeah.
But for a small business that falls entirely on the shoulders of the business owner themselves. And I know there's been a lot of hand-wringing in Canada about our productivity challenges, right? We need to improve Canada's productivity.
Well, we do.
But think of the improvement if we would simply be able to give business owners, the small business owners right across our country, a couple hours a week or a couple hours a month of their own time back.
Yes.
To invest back in their business or spending time with their families. And so we can do that by cutting red tape, cutting unnecessary rules, enforcing the rules that matter, but also making sure if there's any crazy ones or ones that duplicate, that we look at taking those out.
But I don't know, I have to be honest with you. I mean, I because of other things I do in my life, I encounter city halls fairly regularly.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I know, it's a burden. And, I don't know that I see any municipality doing what you're asking. I don't see any municipality saying to their departments, look, let's get sensible here.
Yeah, it's a culture change. I think the best example that I've seen is in Calgary with the mayor, Nenshi there, who, to his credit, when he was elected back in 2010, said that it was important to see a culture change at City Hall and to look at ways of cutting red tape, not just for small business, but for citizens too. There's a lot of stuff where you have to actually go down to City Hall and line up and take your time. But there's also some other interesting ideas. There's some good ideas here in BC, for instance, a regional business license. And we've seen some of that where if you're a tradesperson, you're technically supposed to get a business license in all the municipalities you do business in.
Oh, please.
But that takes time and cost.
That's so Canadian.
Yeah.
Well, why can't we sell lumber to Alberta? We can't buy beef, Or
the municipality of Langford on the island that said, how about a permanent business license? Unless there's a material change in your business or the size of the business or whatever, you register once, that's it. So you reduce the time and cost for the business, and you also reduce the administration costs at City Hall. That seems like a really common sense idea.
Yeah. What, if anything, could you do about rent cycles? Is there anything that the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses tries to do to help It's a tough one.
Rent?
Rent, yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the rent is being driven by the property taxes, the high property taxes.
Yes.
I mean, these are often desirable communities, but if they're not affordable for businesses, small businesses to operate, and we only have the big players, that's not good for those communities. So I think one of the keys is to talk to governments about controlling their spending so they can bring down those tax rates so they can encourage the formation of more small businesses and doing other things to support them, like cutting red tape. There are some things they can do.
You have a lot of people in your association across the country?
Yeah, 109,000 privately run and operated businesses.
Wow.
Across the country, and 10,000 here in BC.
And could you estimate the fiscal impact?
Oh yeah, sure. It's about 60% of all jobs are in small and medium-sized businesses together,
Yes.
and about half the economic output of the country is in that small business sector.
Truly.
And in terms of the number of businesses that are registered, 98% of all businesses are small or medium-sized enterprises. So this is a really important part, the backbone of the economy, but also the heart and soul of our communities.
Do you have the sense that members of Parliament or MLAs actually listen to you? I mean, can you get a hearing when you need one?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think they're listening. It takes a lot of sustained pressure. It takes, I mean, we are the big voice for small business, and we're always looking to add more voices to that.
Yes.
But if enough of us speak up, if enough people get involved, we can change things in terms of payroll taxes or, controlling spending, debt. There's all kinds of issues that we as Canadians and as entrepreneurs in our country can change if we put our minds to it.
Yeah, and what do you think the individual businesses have to do?
Well, get involved. They need to pay attention. They need to start writing letters. They need to care. That's the first step. There's a lot of business owners that just want to keep their heads down, and it's somebody else's problem. It's sort of the classic free rider issue,
Yes,
right? It's
yes.
somebody else can deal with that, but they really need to step up and get involved and have their voice heard. And so we're one vehicle for that. We certainly encourage other forms of political activism, but they need to care. They need to get out there and get involved and have their voice heard.
Does your phone ring with complaints? Do you have people phoning and saying, look, this has happened, can you help me figure this out?
Oh yeah. In fact, we have a business counseling service that we offer to our members. So a lot of times business owners get themselves in trouble with hiring or firing, and they don't know the rules, but they're trying to figure out employment law or workers' compensation rules. So we have business counselors that can help our members through that. So that's an added benefit of belonging to CFIB for sure.
Well, I think you've done a marvelous job, but you're fired because our time is up.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thanks very much.
Richard, thanks. And I'm not giving you 3 chances. It's just over.
Cheers. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. That was great. Richard Truscott with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. So next week, the studio is preparing for the telethon, so we will not be here in studio, but we will rerun an excellent program that we recorded and showed you about a month ago, Equal Parenting After Divorce. Very, very important issue. And then we'll be back with a new program in early December before we take our usual Christmas hiatus. Thanks for being with us here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.